quantum drifter moved slowly through the dark space between stars. Chief Scientist Veltar stood on the bridge, looking out at the endless void through the main window. His compound eyes caught the distant light of far-off suns, each one a tiny dot in the darkness. The ship was heading home after 3 months of successful research in the dangerous void sector. Veltar was proud of his crew. They had found rare minerals that would help their people for generations. The 12 Zephyrians aboard the research vessel had worked hard, collecting samples and data that no one had ever gathered before. Their insectoid bodies were tired, but their spirits were high. Soon they would be back on their homeworld, sharing their discoveries with the collective. The Zephyrians were not warriors. They stood only 4 feet tall, with delicate translucent wings and large compound eyes that saw the world in ways other species could not understand. Their thin limbs were perfect for delicate scientific work, but they were fragile. For thousands of years, the Zephyrian collective had chosen knowledge over conflict. They had no weapons, no armies, and no desire for war. "Chief Veltar," called out Navrin, the ship's pilot, "we are approaching the gravitational marker, preparing to jump to hyperspace." Veltar nodded his elongated head. The journey through normal space was almost over. Once they entered hyperspace, they would be home in just a few days. He watched as Navrin's delicate fingers moved over the control panels. The quantum drive began to hum with energy, preparing to tear a hole in space itself. "Drive charging," reported Kexila from the engineering station. "Energy levels are normal. All systems ready for jump." The ship vibrated gently as the quantum drive reached full power. Outside the windows, space began to shimmer and bend. This was the moment when the ship would slip into hyperspace and travel faster than light itself. Veltar felt the familiar excitement that came with each jump. Then everything went wrong. Instead of the smooth entry into hyperspace they expected, the ship suddenly shook violently. Alarms began to scream throughout the vessel. The lights flickered and dimmed. Through the windows, Veltar saw space twist in ways that should not be possible. The stars stretched and warped, creating patterns that hurt to look at. "What is happening?" Veltar shouted over the noise of the alarms. "Unknown gravitational anomaly," Navrin called back, his voice filled with panic. "The hyperspace window is collapsing." The ship was thrown sideways by invisible forces. Veltar grabbed onto the nearest support beam as his crew struggled to stay at their stations. The quantum drive made sounds it was never meant to make. Sparks flew from control panels as the ship's systems began to fail one by one. "Emergency shutdown," Kexila screamed. "The drive core is overloading." The ship lurched again, throwing several crew members to the floor. Outside, the twisted space slowly returned to normal, but the damage was done. The quantum drifter drifted helplessly, its main engines silent. The quantum drive that had carried them safely through space for years was now dead. "Damage report," Veltar ordered, trying to keep his voice calm, even though fear was growing in his chest. Kexila worked frantically at her station. Her compound eyes reflected the red emergency lights as she checked system after system. "The quantum drive core is completely destroyed. Secondary engines are offline. We have basic life support and emergency power only. How long will life support last?"
Veltar asked, though he dreaded the answer. "With 12 crew members."
"Maybe 10 days if we conserve everything." The bridge fell silent except for the low hum of emergency power and the soft clicking sounds the Zephyrians made when they were afraid. Veltar looked at each of his crew members. These were some of the brightest minds in the collective, but none of them were engineers who could rebuild a quantum drive with basic tools. "Send out a distress signal," Veltar ordered. "All frequencies. Maybe someone will hear us." Navrin began broadcasting their emergency message into the void. The signal would travel at the speed of light, which meant it would take years to reach the nearest inhabited system, but it was their only hope. Somewhere out in the darkness, another ship might hear their call for help. Days passed slowly. The crew worked to conserve power and air. They rationed their food and water carefully. The temperature inside the ship began to drop as the heating system struggled with reduced power. The Zephyrians huddled together for warmth, their thin bodies not built for the cold. Veltar tried to keep his crew's spirits up, but he could see the fear in their eyes. They all knew where they were. The void sector was not just dangerous because of gravitational anomalies and unstable stars. It was also prowled by the Ravager clans, savage pirates who killed without mercy. On the 3rd day, young Zyrtak, the youngest member of the crew, asked the question they were all thinking. Chief Veltar, what if the Ravagers find us before rescue comes? Veltar looked at the young scientist. Zyrtak had just graduated from the academy, and this was his first deep space mission. His compound eyes were wide with fear, and his delicate wings trembled slightly. We must hope that does not happen, Veltar said gently. The collective knows our route. They will send search ships when we do not arrive on schedule. But even as he said the words, Veltar knew the truth. The collective had no warships to send. They had only other research vessels like the Quantum Drifter. If the Ravagers found them first, there would be no rescue. There would be no escape. The crew continued their work, checking and rechecking their systems, hoping for some miracle that would restore power to their engines. But the quantum drive remained cold and dead. Outside the ship, space was empty and silent. No rescue ships appeared on their sensors. No friendly voices answered their distress calls. By the fifth day, even the most optimistic crew members were beginning to lose hope. They had done everything they could. Their distress signal continued to broadcast into the void, but the chances of rescue grew smaller with each passing hour. The life support systems were already showing strain, and the temperature continued to drop. Veltar stood alone on the bridge during what would have been night cycle on their home world. He looked out at the stars and wondered if he had led his crew to their deaths. They had trusted him to bring them home safely, and now they were stranded in the most dangerous part of the galaxy, with no way to defend themselves. In the distance, space remained empty and cold. But unknown to the desperate Zephyrians, their distress signal was traveling through the void, carrying their plea for help to anyone who might be listening. Soon, very soon, that signal would reach ears that were always ready to answer calls for help from those in need. The fifth day started like the others. The crew of the Quantum Drifter went about their daily tasks, checking systems and rationing supplies. The ship felt colder now, and everyone moved more slowly to save energy. Veltar was in the main laboratory when Navran's voice came over the communication system. Chief Veltar, please come to the bridge immediately. We have contacts on sensors. Veltar's hearts began to beat faster. Contacts could mean rescue, but they could also mean something much worse. He made his way to the bridge as quickly as his tired legs would carry him. When he arrived, he saw Navran staring at the sensor display with his compound eyes wide with terror. 3 large ships, Navran reported, his voice shaking. They just dropped out of hyperspace. They are moving toward us. Veltar looked at the sensor readings. The ships were massive, much larger than any collective vessel. Their energy signatures were strange and chaotic, nothing like the clean power systems used by civilized races. As Veltar watched, the 3 ships changed course and began moving directly toward the Quantum Drifter. Are they responding to our distress signal? Asked Kexila, hope in her voice. Before Veltar could answer, the communication system crackled to life. A harsh, guttural voice filled the bridge, speaking in the common trade language that most species understood. Small vessel, this is Captain Thakmore of the Ravager destroyer Bloodfang. You will prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in immediate destruction. The bridge fell silent. Every Zephyrian knew about the Ravager clans. They were the monsters that parents used to frighten children into good behavior. Pirates and killers who showed no mercy to anyone they encountered. The crew looked at Veltar, waiting for him to somehow make this nightmare go away. Through the main window, they could now see the 3 ships approaching. The vessels were huge and ugly, their hulls covered with scars and weapon emplacements. Strange lights flickered along their sides, and wisps of gas leaked from various points, giving them the appearance of mechanical predators. This is Chief Scientist Veltar of the research vessel Quantum Drifter, he said into the communication system, trying to keep his voice steady. We are a scientific expedition from the Zephyrian Collective. We have no weapons and pose no threat to anyone. Harsh laughter came through the speakers. Scientists. Even better. You will have valuable research data and rare materials. Prepare your cargo bays for transfer. You have 1 standard hour. The lead Ravager ship moved closer, and now they could see details of its construction. The hull was dark metal covered with spikes and weapon barrels. Strange symbols were painted across its surface in what looked like dried blood. Smaller ships began launching from its docking bays, moving toward the Quantum Drifter like sharks smelling blood in the water. What if we refuse? Veltar asked, though he already knew the answer. Then you die slowly instead of quickly, Thakmore replied. 1 hour, little bugs. Make your choice. The communication ended, leaving the bridge in terrified silence. Veltar looked at his crew. These were brilliant scientists, not fighters. They had no weapons training, no combat experience, and no way to defend themselves against hardened pirates. We could try to run, suggested Navrin, but his voice showed he did not believe it would work. With what engines? Kexila replied sadly. We can barely maintain life support. Through the windows they watched as the first boarding pod launched from the lead Ravager ship. The metal pod was shaped like a massive bullet, designed to punch through a ship's hull and deliver armed pirates directly inside. More pods were preparing to launch. Chief Veltar, said young Zyrtak, his voice barely a whisper. What are we going to do? Veltar wished he had an answer. In all his years of study and research, he had never faced a situation like this. The collective had always avoided conflict, trading away problems rather than fighting. But the Ravagers were not interested in trade or negotiation. They wanted everything the Zephyrians had, and they would take it by force. We give them what they want, Veltar said finally. Our research data, our mineral samples, everything. Maybe they will let us live. But even as he spoke, Veltar knew it was not true. The Ravagers were known for their cruelty. They would take what they wanted and then kill the crew anyway, probably slowly and painfully. The only question was how long the Zephyrians would suffer before the end came. The first boarding pod slammed into the ship's hull with a sound like thunder. Metal tore and atmosphere vented into space before emergency seals closed the breach. Alarms screamed throughout the ship as the Ravagers began cutting their way inside. Everyone to the main laboratory, Veltar ordered. Stay together. Do not resist them. The crew gathered in the central lab, huddling together like frightened children. They could hear the sound of cutting tools working through the hull, followed by heavy footsteps in the corridors. Harsh voices shouted commands in languages the Zephyrians did not understand. The laboratory door exploded inward, and the first Ravager stepped inside. He was a massive reptilian creature, over 7 feet tall with cybernetic implants grafted onto his skull. His armor was covered with spikes and trophies taken from previous victims. Behind him came others, some humanoid, some completely alien, all carrying weapons and wearing expressions of savage hunger. So small, the reptilian said, looking down at the cowering Zephyrians. So fragile. This will be fun. One of the other Ravagers, a creature that looked like a cross between an insect and a machine, scanned the laboratory with electronic eyes. Valuable equipment here, Korvash. High-quality research tools. The boss will be pleased. What about them? Korvash pointed at the Zephyrians with his weapon. Standard procedure. Take what we want, then space them. No witnesses? Veltar stepped forward, trying to protect his crew even though he knew it was hopeless. Please, we will give you everything. Our research, our samples, all of it. Just let my people live. Korvash laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Your people? These are not people, old bug. These are insects. And we step on insects. The Ravager raised his weapon, preparing to demonstrate his point. The Zephyrians closed their eyes and waited for death. They had no weapons, no defenses, and no hope. This was how their story would end, killed by monsters in the cold darkness of space. But then something impossible happened. Space itself seemed to scream. A sound that should not exist in the vacuum of space somehow reached their ears. A deep, resonating hum that made the ship's hull vibrate. The Ravagers stopped what they were doing and looked around in confusion. Even these hardened killers had never heard anything like it. Outside the ship, something was happening that would change everything. But inside the laboratory, surrounded by armed pirates, the Zephyrians could only wait and hope that somehow, against all odds, rescue might still be possible. The sound grew louder, and the ship shook as if something massive was approaching. The Ravagers began talking rapidly among themselves in their harsh languages, their confidence suddenly replaced by uncertainty. Something was coming. Something the Ravagers had not expected. Something that would soon teach these predators what it meant to prey on the innocent. The strange humming sound grew stronger, making the walls of the quantum drifter shake. The Ravagers in the laboratory looked at each other with growing concern. Korvash pressed a communication device on his armor and spoke rapidly in his harsh language. The response made his reptilian face twist with anger and confusion. What is happening? One of the other pirates asked. Something just appeared on sensors, Korvash replied. Something big. Outside in space, reality seemed to tear open like fabric being ripped apart. A massive ship emerged from what looked like a wound in space itself. The vessel was enormous, 2 kilometers of angular, aggressive design that spoke of war and violence. Its hull was dark gray metal covered with armor plating and weapon systems that had no equal in known space. On the bridge of the Ravager flagship Bloodfang, Captain Thakmore stared at his sensors in disbelief. The ship that had just appeared was unlike anything in his database. Its energy signature was completely unknown, and its design was both primitive and advanced at the same time. "What species builds ships like that?" asked his tactical officer. "None that I know of," Thakmore replied, his cybernetic eye focusing on the massive vessel. "But it does not matter. We outnumber them 3-1. The unknown ship moved with surprising grace for something so large. Along its hull, weapon systems began to power up, creating lines of energy that ran from bow to stern. Strange markings could be seen on its side, letters and numbers that meant nothing to the Ravagers. Then the communication system crackled too. "Life. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Iron Will. You have 60 seconds to cease hostilities and withdraw from this system, or we will consider you enemy combatants." The voice was calm and steady, speaking in perfect trade language, but there was something underneath the politeness, a coldness that made even hardened pirates feel uncomfortable. Captain Thakmore had never heard of this Earth or these humans, but he was not intimidated by unknown species. "Human ship, this is Captain Thakmore of the Ravager clans. You are interfering with our lawful salvage operation. Leave immediately or face the consequences." There was a pause before the human captain replied. 30 seconds, Thakmore laughed, showing rows of sharp teeth. "You think to threaten us? We are the Ravager clans. We have destroyed 1,000 ships and killed 1,000,000 enemies. Your single vessel cannot stand against our fleet." Another pause. Then the human voice came back, colder than before. 15 seconds. "Fire on them," Thakmore roared to his weapons officer. "Show these humans what happens to those who challenge the Ravagers." The 3 Ravager ships opened fire at once. Energy beams and plasma bolts streaked through space toward the human vessel. The attack was massive enough to destroy most ships in the galaxy. The weapons struck the Iron Will and brilliant explosions lit up the darkness. But when the light faded, the human ship was still there. Its shields had absorbed the entire attack without even flickering. Worse, it was now moving toward them with deliberate purpose. "Impossible," whispered Thakmore's tactical officer. "Nothing can withstand that much firepower." "Time's up," came the human captain's voice. What happened next redefined the Ravagers' understanding of warfare. The human ship did not use energy weapons or plasma cannons like every other species in the galaxy. Instead, ports opened along its hull and massive gun barrels emerged, weapons that belonged to an earlier age of warfare. The railguns fired. The sound was like thunder, somehow carrying through space itself. Solid metal projectiles, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, screamed toward the Ravager ships. The rounds were simple pieces of tungsten, nothing more than dense metal shaped into projectiles. But at the speeds they were traveling, they hit with the force of small nuclear weapons. The first salvo struck the Bloodfang dead center. The Ravager ship's shields, designed to stop energy weapons, offered no protection against solid matter moving at such incredible speed. The tungsten rods punched through the shields like they were not there, then tore through the ship's armor as if it were paper. Atmosphere and bodies vented into space as the projectiles carved massive holes through the vessel. The ship's main reactor went critical, and secondary explosions began tearing the Bloodfang apart from the inside. In less than 10 seconds, Captain Thakmore's flagship was a dying hulk, drifting helplessly with fires burning throughout its structure. The other 2 Ravager ships tried to scatter, but the human vessel was faster than it had any right to be. Its engines produced no visible exhaust, yet it moved with the speed and grace of a fighter craft despite its enormous size. "All ships retreat." Thakmore gasped into his communicator as his bridge filled with smoke. "Fall back to hyperspace." But the humans were not done. From launch bays along the Iron Will's hull, smaller ships emerged like angry insects. These human fighters were sleek and deadly, moving in perfect formation toward the surviving Ravager vessels. The lead fighter pilot was Lieutenant Alex Turner, a young man who had been waiting for action like this his entire career. His fighter was a work of art, streamlined and fast, armed with both missiles and old-fashioned autocannons that fired solid projectiles at incredible rates. "This is Eagle 1. Turner's voice came over the communication channel, beginning attack run on the second destroyer. The human fighters moved like nothing the Ravagers had ever seen. They flew in patterns that seemed impossible, weaving between enemy fire with precision that spoke of incredible skill and reflexes. Their weapons were different too. Instead of energy beams, they fired streams of solid metal that tore through armor and hull alike. The second Ravager destroyer tried to target the fast-moving fighters, but its gunners could not keep up. The humans flew too fast, turned too quickly, and struck too hard. Within minutes, the destroyer's weapon systems were disabled and its engines were failing. Back on the quantum drifter, the Ravagers in the laboratory were receiving frantic messages from their ships. Korvash pressed his communicator to his head, listening to reports of destruction and death. His confident expression was rapidly being replaced by fear. "What is happening out there?" demanded one of his subordinates. "The humans," Korvash replied, his voice shaking. "They are destroying everything. Our ships cannot touch them." Through the laboratory's small windows, the Zephyrians could see the battle raging outside. Explosions lit up the darkness as the human fighters continued their assault on the Ravager fleet. The massive human warship moved through space like an avenging angel, its weapons speaking death to those who preyed on the innocent. The third Ravager ship tried to escape, jumping to hyperspace in a desperate attempt to flee, but the humans had anticipated this. Torpedoes launched from the Iron Will, not energy weapons but actual physical projectiles equipped with their own hyperspace drives. The torpedoes followed the fleeing ship into hyperspace and caught it at the edge of the system. The explosion was visible even from the quantum drifter. The third Ravager ship simply ceased to exist, torn apart by weapons that pursued their targets across dimensions. In less than 20 minutes, the entire Ravager fleet was destroyed or disabled. 3 massive warships that had terrorized the sector for years were reduced to floating scrap and bodies. The humans had not just won. They had demonstrated a level of military power that redefined what was possible in space combat. Korvash stared at his communicator, which now carried only static. His ships were gone. His captain was dead. His entire fleet had been wiped out by a single human vessel using weapons that should not work, but somehow did. "Surrender," he said quietly to his fellow pirates. "Drop your weapons and surrender." The other Ravagers looked at him in shock. Korvash had never surrendered to anyone in his entire career, but as he looked out at the burning remains of his fleet, he knew that continuing to fight would only lead to death. Outside, the human ship was moving toward them. Soon, the beings who had just destroyed an entire Ravager fleet would be boarding their ship. The Zephyrians could only wait and wonder what these mysterious humans wanted, and whether their rescue would be any better than their capture. The battle was not over yet. On the bridge of the Iron Will, Captain Jake Morrison watched his tactical display with the calm focus that had made him one of Earth's most respected commanders. The main Ravager fleet was destroyed, but there were still pirates aboard the research vessel, and innocent lives were at stake. "Status report," Morrison ordered. Commander Lisa Grant, his tactical officer, studied her screens carefully. Lisa was known throughout the fleet for her brilliant strategic mind and her ability to coordinate complex operations. Her fingers moved quickly over her controls as she analyzed the situation. "The Ravager flagship is dead in space, but life signs show survivors," she reported. "The second destroyer is disabled but not destroyed. The third ship was completely eliminated during its escape attempt." "What about the research vessel?" "Scans show approximately 15 Ravager life signs aboard, along with 12 smaller life forms that match the distress signal species. The pirates appear to be holding them in the main laboratory section." Morrison nodded grimly. This was the part of space combat that required the most skill, dealing with hostage situations. The humans could easily destroy the research vessel and everyone aboard, but that would defeat the purpose of their intervention. "Alex, how are your fighters doing?" Morrison asked over the communication system. Lieutenant Alex Turner's voice came back immediately. "All birds are green, Captain. We've secured the area around the research vessel. No more Ravager ships on sensors. Good work. Return to base and prepare for recovery operations." Morrison turned to his communication officer. "Hail the research vessel. Let's see if we can talk our way through this." The communication system crackled as it connected to the quantum drifter. Morrison could hear harsh voices arguing in the background before one of them answered. "Human ship, this is Korvash of the Ravager boarding party. We have prisoners. Come any closer and we will kill them all." Morrison's expression did not change, but everyone on the bridge could feel the temperature drop. The captain leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had seen him through a dozen major battles. "Korvash, this is Captain Morrison. You have two choices. Release the prisoners immediately and surrender, or we will come and take them. I strongly recommend the first option. You cannot reach us without killing your precious research bugs," Korvash replied, but his voice lacked the confidence it had held earlier. "We have them surrounded. Any attack will result in their deaths." "I see," Morrison said calmly. "Lisa, what's our options for a surgical boarding action?" Commander Grant was already working on the problem. She brought up a three-dimensional image of the research vessel, highlighting the areas where the Ravagers were located. Her tactical mind quickly identified the best approach. "The pirates are concentrated in the main laboratory section," she reported. "If we can get a boarding team to sections 7 and 12, we can approach from two directions simultaneously. The research vessel's hull is thin enough that we can cut through in multiple locations." Time frame: 15 minutes to position our teams, another 5 minutes to breach and secure. The key is coordination. We need to hit them before they can react. Morrison nodded and activated the ship's internal communication system. "Major Carter, report to the bridge." Major Ben Carter arrived within minutes. He was a tall, muscular man with scars on his face that spoke of many battles. Carter commanded the Iron Will's Marine contingent, and he was known for his ability to complete impossible missions with minimal casualties. "You called, Captain? We have a hostage situation on the research vessel. 15 pirates holding 12 civilians. I need your best people for a surgical strike." Carter studied the tactical display, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of the ship's layout. He had led boarding actions against everything from pirate strongholds to alien warships, and each situation required a different approach. "I'll take Alpha and Bravo squads," Carter decided. "We go in through the hull in 2 locations, simultaneous breach. Fast and quiet until we're in position, then overwhelming force. The pirates won't know what hit them. Casualties? None on our side if we do this right. The civilians should be safe if we move fast enough." Morrison trusted Carter's judgment completely. The Major had never failed a mission, and his Marines were some of the finest soldiers humanity had ever produced. They trained constantly for situations exactly like this one. "Do it." Carter saluted and left the bridge to prepare his teams. Within minutes, 2 groups of human Marines were suiting up in the Iron Will's armory. Their powered armor was a marvel of engineering, lightweight but incredibly strong, equipped with weapon systems and sensors that gave each Marine the combat effectiveness of an entire squad from earlier eras. The Marines moved through the ship's corridors with practiced efficiency. Each one carried weapons that seemed almost primitive compared to the energy rifles used by most galactic militaries. But the humans had learned that sometimes simple solutions were the most effective. Their assault rifles fired solid bullets at high velocity, backed up by grenades and other kinetic weapons. "Alpha Squad ready," reported Sergeant Pete Williams over the communication. "System, Bravo Squad ready," added Corporal Amy Stevens. The 2 squads, launched from the Iron Will in specialized boarding pods designed for stealth operations. The pods were small and fast, almost invisible to most sensor systems. They approached the research vessel from different angles, using the larger ship's bulk to hide their approach. On the quantum drifter, the Ravagers were growing more nervous by the minute. Korvash paced back and forth in the laboratory, his weapon trained on the cowering Zephyrians. The other pirates watched the windows and corridors, expecting an attack at any moment. "Why are they taking so long?" asked one of the younger pirates. "They are planning something," Korvash replied. "Humans are supposed to be clever, but they cannot reach us without going through multiple bulkheads, and we will hear them coming." He was wrong. The human boarding pods attached to the research vessel's hull with barely a whisper. Cutting tools began working through the metal, creating precise holes that would allow the Marines to enter without triggering any alarms. The humans had studied the ship's construction during their approach, identifying the exact points where they could breach without damaging vital systems. 30 seconds to breach, Carter reported over the communication system. In the laboratory, Veltar watched the Ravagers with growing hope. He could sense something happening, though he could not say what. The pirates seemed more agitated than before, constantly checking their weapons and looking around nervously. "Breaching now," came Carter's voice. The attacks came from two directions simultaneously. Human Marines burst through the walls of the research vessel like avenging spirits, their powered armor making them look like mechanical demons. They moved with incredible speed and precision, their weapons already trained on their targets. "Drop your weapons," Carter shouted as his squad swept into the laboratory from one direction. "Surrender now," Stevens called out as her team entered from the opposite side. The Ravagers tried to fight back, but they were completely outmatched. The humans moved like they could see the future, dodging enemy fire while placing their own shots with surgical precision. Their bullets punched through Ravager armor like it was made of paper, dropping the pirates one by one. Corvash tried to grab one of the Zephyrians as a shield, but Sergeant Williams put 3 round center mass before the pirate could complete the move. The reptilian crashed to the floor, his weapon clattering across the metal deck. The entire fight lasted less than 30 seconds. When the smoke cleared, all 15 Ravagers were either dead or unconscious. Not a single Zephyrian had been harmed, and none of the human Marines had even been scratched. Carter activated his communication system. "Captain, the package is secure. All hostiles neutralized, all civilians safe. Outstanding work. Major, bring our new friends aboard for medical attention." The Marines moved efficiently through the research vessel, securing the area and preparing the Zephyrians for transport. Corporal Stevens, who also served as a medic, began checking each of the aliens for injuries while her teammates made sure there were no more threats aboard the ship. Veltar looked up at the humans in amazement. These beings had just accomplished something that should have been impossible. They had rescued his crew from heavily armed pirates without losing a single life on either side. Their technology was impressive, but it was their skill and coordination that truly amazed him. "Are you hurt?" Stevens asked, kneeling beside the chief scientist. Her voice was gentle and caring, completely different from the harsh commands she had been shouting during the battle. "No," Veltar replied, still trying to process what had just happened. "But how did you do that? How did you move so quickly and fight so precisely?" Stevens smiled behind her helmet's visor. "Training and teamwork. Plus, we really don't like bullies." As the Marines began escorting the Zephyrians toward the boarding pods, Veltar realized that everything had changed. These humans had appeared from nowhere and destroyed an entire Ravager fleet in minutes. They had weapons and skills that seemed impossible, yet they used them to protect strangers rather than conquer territory. The medical bay of the Iron Will was unlike anything Veltar had ever seen. The walls were clean white metal and the air smelled of antiseptic and ozone. Strange machines hummed quietly in the corners, their purposes unknown but somehow comforting. The 12 Zephyrians sat on examination tables that adjusted automatically to their smaller frames. Dr. Amy Stevens moved from patient to patient with gentle efficiency. She was a small woman by human standards, but she seemed enormous compared to the delicate aliens. Her hands were steady as she used scanning devices that looked like metal wands to check each Zephyrian for injuries. "You're all suffering from mild hypothermia and dehydration," she explained to Veltar, "but nothing that can't be fixed with some warm food and rest. Your species seems remarkably resilient." Veltar watched the human doctor work with fascination. Despite their fearsome reputation in battle, these humans showed incredible care for beings they had never met before. Dr. Stevens treated each Zephyrian like they were her own people, speaking softly and making sure they were comfortable. "Why are you helping us?" asked young Zyrtak, his compound eyes wide with wonder. Dr. Stevens paused in her work and looked at the young scientist. "Because you needed help and we were able to provide it. That's what decent people do. But we are not your people," Zyrtak continued. "We cannot repay you for this rescue." "What do you gain?" The doctor smiled, an expression that transformed her entire face. "Sometimes the only reward you need is knowing you did the right thing." Captain Morrison entered the medical bay as Dr. Stevens finished her examinations. The human captain was tall and broad-shouldered with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command, but there was also warmth there. "Chief Veltar, I'm Captain Jake Morrison. I want to personally apologize for what you've been through. The Ravagers should never have been allowed to operate in this sector. Veltar studied the human captain carefully. Everything about Morrison spoke of strength and confidence, yet he was taking time to personally check on rescued aliens. This was not the behavior Veltar had expected from a military commander. "Captain Morrison, I must thank you for saving my crew, but I do not understand why you were here."
How did you know we needed help?
Morrison pulled up a chair and sat down, bringing himself closer to the Zephyrian's eye level. "We've been tracking the Ravager clans for months. When we detected their ships moving toward this location, we investigated. We picked up your distress signal and came as fast as we could." "You came to fight the Ravagers because of our distress signal?" Veltar asked, amazement in his voice. "We came because someone was in trouble and we could help," Morrison replied simply. "That's what the Human Defense Network does. We protect those who cannot protect themselves." As they talked, Chief Engineer Pete Williams was working on the damaged quantum drifter. Williams was a stocky man with grease-stained hands and an encyclopedic knowledge of starship systems. He had taken one look at the Zephyrian vessel and immediately began planning repairs. "The quantum drive core is completely shot," he reported to Captain Morrison over the communication system, "but their technology is pretty elegant. I can jury-rig a temporary drive that will get them home safely." Williams worked with 2 other engineers, crawling through the damaged sections of the research vessel with tools and replacement parts. The humans seemed to understand the alien technology intuitively, adapting their own equipment to work with Zephyrian systems. "This is remarkable," said Kexila, the ship's engineer, as she watched Williams install a human power coupling into her ship's systems. "Your technology is so different from ours, yet you make it work together perfectly." Williams grinned, his face streaked with lubricant and metal shavings. "Engineering is engineering, no matter what species designed it. The principles are always the same." As the repairs continued, the Zephyrians learned more about their rescuers. The humans had emerged into galactic civilization only recently, but they had quickly established themselves as protectors of peaceful species. Their military was powerful beyond anything most races could imagine, but they used that power only to defend others. "Your people must be very wealthy to maintain such a large military," Veltar observed to Captain Morrison. Morrison shook his head. "We're not wealthy by galactic standards. Most of our resources go into defense and exploration, but we believe that protecting innocent people is worth any cost." "That is unusual," Veltar admitted. "Most species use their military power to gain territory or resources. You use yours to help strangers." "That's because we learned some hard lessons in our own history," Morrison explained. "We know what it's like to be the victims of bullies and tyrants. When we finally reached the stars and found other species facing the same threats, we decided to do something about it." Dr. Stevens brought the Zephyrians food from the ship's stores, simple nutrition bars that had been tested to ensure they were safe for alien consumption. The bars tasted better than anything the Zephyrians had eaten in days, and they began to feel their strength returning. "Captain," came Williams's voice over the communication system, "repairs are complete. The quantum drifter is ready for hyperspace travel." Morrison stood up and activated a wall display that showed a star map of the local sector. "Chief Veltar, I'd like to escort your ship back to Zephyrian space personally. The sector isn't entirely clear of Ravager sympathizers, and I want to make sure you reach home safely." Veltar felt emotions he had trouble putting into words. These humans had risked their lives to save strangers, repaired their ship without being asked, and now wanted to escort them home to ensure their safety. It was more kindness than he had ever experienced from another species. "Captain Morrison, I do not know how my people can ever repay this debt." Morrison smiled, and Veltar began to understand why so many species spoke of humans with a mixture of fear and admiration. "There's no debt, Chief, but there is something I'd like to give you." The captain reached into his uniform and pulled out a small device about the size of a Zephyrian's hand. It was made of dark metal and covered with human symbols. "This is a communicator linked to the Human Defense Network," Morrison explained. "If your people ever need help again, activate this device and we'll come. No matter where you are, no matter what the threat, we'll answer your call." Veltar took the device with trembling hands. Such a gift was beyond price. A direct line to the most powerful military force in known space, offered freely to people the humans had just met. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why would you do this for us?" Morrison's expression grew serious. Because the galaxy is a dangerous place and peaceful people shouldn't have to face that danger alone. Earth remembers what it was like to be weak and afraid. Now that we're strong, we have a responsibility to protect those who still are. The journey back to Zephyrian space took 3 days. The massive human warship escorted the small research vessel through hyperspace, its sensors constantly scanning for threats. Along the way, the crew of the Iron Will shared meals with their rescued guests, teaching them about human culture and learning about Zephyrian science. When they finally reached the edge of collective space, a small fleet of Zephyrian ships was waiting. These were not warships, the collective had none, but hospital ships and transports come to welcome their people home. "Thank you, Captain Morrison," Veltar said as he prepared to transfer back to his ship. "My people will remember what you have done for us." Morrison nodded seriously. "Chief, there's something you need to know. The galaxy is changing. Species like the Ravagers have had free reign for too long. But that's ending. Humanity is making contact with peaceful civilizations across known space, offering protection and alliance. Your people don't have to face the darkness alone anymore." As the quantum drifter moved toward the collective ships, Veltar activated the human communicator and sent a message to the central government. The message was simple, but would reshape Zephyrian society forever. The humans have come, and they fight for justice. Within hours, the news spread throughout collective space and beyond. A new power had emerged among the stars, one that used its strength to protect rather than conquer. For species that had lived in fear of pirates and predators, the arrival of humanity represented something unprecedented: hope. The Iron Will turned away from collective space and jumped back into hyperspace, ready to answer the next distress call. Behind them, an entire civilization began to understand that the age of unchallenged tyranny was ending. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the years that followed, the story of the rescue in the Void Sector would be told and retold across 1,000 worlds. It became a symbol of hope for the weak and a warning to those who preyed on the innocent. The humans had shown that there were still those willing to fight for what was right, regardless of the cost. And whenever peaceful species found themselves in danger, they remembered the words Captain Morrison had spoken: "We'll answer your call." For the first time in galactic history, that promise actually meant something,